Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of Privacy Laws, where I, Donata String Skillbridge, speak with amazing privacy professionals, and we have some laughs along the way as well. Today, I will be speaking with Andrea Amico about a topic that affects almost everyone: cars and privacy. Andrea is one of the world's leading authorities on vehicle privacy and data security and founder of Privacy for Cars, the first and only privacy tech company focused on identifying the challenges posed by vehicle data and creating solutions to better protect consumers and businesses. So, Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today. Since you started a company called Privacy for Cars, I just have to ask you, are you a privacy guy or a car guy or both?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today, Donata. I'm definitely a privacy person. Um, I drive a 13-year-old vehicle, which I personally love because A, it's average age of a vehicle in the United States. So I like that. I can relate to what most Americans drive on the road. Um, but so by definition, I'm not a cars person. I do not itch to get into the latest version of a vehicle. I'm happy with my ride the way it is. It actually is much more private than the equivalent car I would have to buy today. So I love what I have.
That's awesome. Yeah, my car is 2016 and it does not have all the fancy new bells and whistles, but there's less things to break. So that's always good. Um, how would you personally define privacy when it comes to cars?
So I occasionally watch over and over a video from the turn of the century um, in which Steve Jobs is defining privacy at a big tech conference. And what he says is privacy is will tell you what data will collect from you, will ask you if it's okay, will ask you again, and will use it only for what we ask you permission to do it. And if you want to change your mind, that's okay. And ultimately, I think that this is really what privacy is about. Isn't it about choice? It's about defining, sharing what you want about yourself when you want for the purpose that you want and nothing else. And when it comes to cars, I think Mozilla said it best last year when they published the report on automotive that automotive is the worst category that ever encountered in the entire lifetime of that nonprofit. There's a lot of challenges. I'm sure we're going to get into them today.
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't really think about it as a consumer of how many different things collect your data, right? You go to a website and you input your contact information and your data's collected, but there's also things that you have that you don't necessarily realize are collecting your data. And I'm definitely guilty of this too. I've rented a car, connected my phone, played my music, and then I return the car to the rental place and I don't really do anything because, my flight takes off in an hour and I'm already running late. And I get on the flight and I forget about it. But, when you rent a car, for example, a lot of times you'll see like 10 different devices that have been previously paired to a car. And you did a study in 2014 about this on how frequently and what kind of data is being left in rental and used cars for sale. What did your study find?
So back in the day, and by the way, I relate with the experience, right? I've been guilty of the same thing myself, and I think that one of the reasons for that is because we don't think of a car as an electronic device.
Mhm.
Probably because the name car hasn't changed, right? So we went from typewriters to laptops, we went from phones to smartphones, but cars have been called cars. But reality is that the same evolution has happened with vehicles. 40% of the content of vehicles nowadays is electronic. So it's really not any different than your smartphone. Just happens to be bigger, have a lot more a lot more sensors, and collect a lot more data. But other than that, it's just like a phone. Um, but back to your question, right? So when I started to look into this, you're right. I pulled a statistical sample of cars, and I looked at how often vehicles contained it. And back then, the average was that 2 out of 3 cars for sale contain data of the prior owner. We're talking about, your home address, your garage door codes, what people you called, and the contacts, and all this kind of stuff. And those numbers kept evolving in the wrong direction. And by that, I mean that year over year, we keep repeating analysis, and it turns out that more and more vehicles have data behind, so the percentage is increasing, but also the depth of how much data is left behind is also increasing because technology is evolving. And again, more sensors collect more data, and so when it's left behind, there's a bigger treasure trove.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're totally right. You can see somebody's home address. They usually save their work address, whatever areas they're traveling to the most frequently, or who they called and things like that. When looking at cars, are there certain types of cars that collect more information than others?
It goes back to my previous question, right? Technology has evolved. So at the turn of the century, very few cars had navigation and not many had Bluetooth. And when you sync your phone over Bluetooth back then, it just collected your Bluetooth identifier, the name of your phone, and maybe a copy of your contacts and maybe some logs of have you called or texted today. Like today, you can find out what's the precise model of a phone that you have, all sorts of identifiers, what the operating system is on it, what apps are running on it. There's records of what photos you have taken with your phone and the full database, like the actual content of the text messages in there, and much, much more. Right. So as as you'll hear this over and over, right? As this evolution of technology happened in vehicles, the capabilities of collect and store data has exploded.
It's interesting. There's a new feature now in cars that I saw in a commercial where the car can read off your text message to you, which I feel like could, number one, get a lot of people into trouble. If they have a friend or their spouse in the car and it's something they're not supposed to know about, or just the car knowing what the contents of those messages are. I think that can be really dangerous because that can um, reveal all kinds of personal information like your religion, your sexual identity, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about what's in your text messages, right? From anything from the check-in with your kids that you dropped off after school to your medical appointment to a record of whatever credit card statement you have just gotten to literally whatever, right? And that's just text messages. um, Nowadays cars, for instance, learn, they can read your calendars, many of them can. They learn from your past habits, and so if you drive in a new car, you may have had the experience that the car suggests, hey Andrea, isn't it time to go to the airport next?
Yeah.
Well, how do they know about this? Because it's in my calendar that I'm taking a flight, and so they know that the next thing I'm doing is to go to the airport.
Hmm.
And again, there's a lot of convenience to that. I'm not denying that, and I think a lot of people would love the convenience. Um, and I think it's perfectly okay to deliver convenience, and many features, for instance, new are based, improve safety on vehicles. All of those things are wonderful. The challenge is that there's not many of us who speak loudly about the fact that there's a dark side to all of this. A lot of this data is collected so that you can be analyzed, microsegmented, targeted by companies, so that your data can be sold to all sorts of providers, including your insurance company, government entities, data brokers, and so on and so forth. And and again, this is not apparent to most consumers. It's really not disclosed. And we've also done studies in which when consumers go to the dealership, they ask, hey, I just drove a car. Is it true that this car collect data? Is it true that my manufacturer has the rights to this data, can sell it and share it, including to, those kind of companies we were talking about before, or the government? Typically, you get answers that are, no, 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 of course, this would never happen. But it actually does.
Yeah, that's very creepy. So if you're in the market to purchase a car and you want to become more educated about privacy when it comes to cars, how do you do that? I know your company's released the vehicle privacy report. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, the original answer should have been, go ask your dealer. But unfortunately, again, we know that that's probably not a great way to do so unless they really have had some additional materials and support, which typically the manufacturers do not provide to them. And so, given that we wanted to lift the fog of ignorance or misinformation that was out there, we thought, well, why don't we give to consumers a simple way for them to understand at a high level what is it that those thousands of words in legalese companies put together to try to explain what is happening with their car. And so we embarked in this project, several years ago, and then we published the first version 2 years ago of Vehicle Privacy Report. And essentially, it's a free tool for consumers. It is truly free. I've asked multiple times, how do you monetize it? We don't, including we don't track users and we don't have cookies on the page. That's why you will not see a cookie banner. We actually don't care who you are. We just want to educate the public. And so you go in there, you punch in the VIN of your car, and through that VIN, we determine not only what's the make, the model of the year of the manufacturer, but we go down to what features may be in your cars, what services may be in your cars, and has anybody owned that vehicle before for which we have a record in which something that was good for your privacy, such as deleting data from the car, was done before or not. And so, again, people go there, and then what we do is that we provide a set of icons so that in a few minutes you can get a sense of what it is that the manufacturer policy is, what data they collect, what is it shared, what features in your car. Do you have Sirius XM? Do you have Android Auto? What do those things do? And if you enter who is your auto finance company and who's your auto insurance company, we'll also try to tell you, do those companies have policies to have some protection of your data or they don't? And throughout that experience, we also try to prompt consumers into taking action that are positive for their privacy. So we started with allowing consumers to appoint us as agents, which we do for free. And now with the new version, we're telling people, look, you want to go and file for yourself? This is where you go. Do you want to know how to reach out to your manufacturer? Here's the phone number. Here's the website. Here's where you go and fill a form. By the way, you don't like the answers you get? Uh, make your voice heard. Click a button and we'll tell you this is your local government agency that you can report issues that you're experiencing with your privacy. This is who your local state representatives in the House and the Senate are. So you can tell them what's your experience so that they care about the privacy of your vehicle. I mean, the vehicle is the largest purchase that most Americans make. And the fact that we don't disclose to those consumers that they're not only paying hard-earned dollars, but they're also paying daily with a streams of zeros and ones that is used to monetize them. I think it's scandalous. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is to educate the public, empower them with knowledge, and take from hours down to minutes the effort it takes to take action and try to get better privacy.
I love that it's based on your car's VIN number because, let's say I go to toyota.com and I try to find privacy information and there's reams and reams of information and I don't know what part applies to me. It's really cool that it's based on the VIN number so you can know exactly what's going on with your exact make and model and year of car.
Yeah, and we try. Look, some information is by make. So Toyota has one set of, well, actually multiple sets of privacy policies and terms. But for instance, the fact that if you have an older car, right? You and I have vehicles that don't have telematics. What does it mean? There's not a SIM. There's not a cell phone embedded inside your car. So that makes some of those documents, the data collections, disclosures, that's irrelevant. And so we remove it from you. You drive the latest and greatest model that has all the bells and whistles, all the technology, you'll get more disclosure and more information because your car has more technological capabilities. So that's what we're trying to do.
I read somewhere that these cars nowadays can even collect how hard you brake and things like that. Is that true?
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, again, a car is just a little giant version of your computer and your phone meshed together and a bunch of other stuff, right? So just like your phone, it has gyroscopes and accelerometers. It has all these sensors to determine how the vehicle is moving into space, and everything is logged. But also, your accelerator has sensors, your brakes have sensors, your steering wheel has sensors. All of that gets combined together so you can create a super, super precise description of how that vehicle is traveling. And so if you're braking hard, not only you will see that from a string of GPS points, just like your Waze or Google Maps will do, but actually the sensors in the car will also validate and confirm and provide a much more precise picture of how you're actually driving. And the scary part is that some of this data may come and haunt you.
Yeah, so I did see a report about that, that the driving data was, in some instances, shared or sold to insurance companies. And some people's insurance premiums were going up because of that. And they had no idea that this was collected or shared.
Yeah, there are many, many class actions now based exactly on this, and there's also attorney generals in various states that are taking action. Um, they are arguing that uh, this is unfair and deceptive behavior by part not only of manufacturer, but the insurers have been dragged into it, and other service providers have been dragged into it. Um, the logic that they have is if consumers had been clearly told, and then it would have been a thing. But the fact that this disclosure was buried into very long, complex legal documents, and that people didn't realize that when they were buying a car, they were agreeing to all these things, that's what made it, in the eyes of these attorney generals, unfair and deceptive. And that's why you have so many lawsuits going on right now.
I think so. I'm sure a lot of people would have said no if they would have known that, this data was being collected, shared with the insurance provider, and then used to make insurance decisions. I think a lot of people would have said no. Apart from, the sharing and the selling, all the data that's collected by these cars, could that be accessed by hackers and as well and used to compromise your security?
Sadly, yes. Again, think of your car not any different than your laptop or your smartphone, right? Data that is collected by those devices goes into two places. One, it stays on the device, and unfortunately, while your phone is encrypted and while your laptop typically is encrypted, most cars are not. And so I want you to think that every time you sold a car, every time you return a rental car, just like you were saying before, without deleting the data, it's like if you handed your smartphone to a complete stranger. Now, most strangers are nice people. They will not do anything, but do you really want to take the chances? But that's what happens today with more than 4 out of 5 cars. This data is left behind. The
Absolutely.
second thing is that newer cars have, again, this cellular connection. And so your car receives and sends data. And so your data is not only just in the car, it's in the cloud, which really means, in the computing systems of many, many companies, not just the manufacturer. And unfortunately, there's a very, very long streak of examples of data breaches. And I mean, I read about a data breach of a company in the automotive space at least once a week, and typically more often than that. And so that's a scary thought. And our mantra has always been around how do we help consumers minimize their data footprint, because the safest data is data doesn't exist, has been deleted. And how do we enable consumers to make informed and smart choices? And that's what gave birth to the Call Privacy Report.
Very cool. So, when it comes to the responsibility for this, obviously a lot of that responsibility falls to the manufacturer of the vehicle. But do dealerships or car rental companies themselves have any type of responsibility to prevent or correct these types of issues?
Yeah, so actually, I see a lot of action and attention, especially in the press, on manufacturers. And look, clearly they have a number of responsibilities given from, starting from the fact that they design the vehicles in a certain way, and that some of them collect data directly from the vehicles through these telematic connections or other ways. But reality is that the picture is much more complex. This is like me saying that the privacy challenges with laptops reside with Dell, HP, and whoever else, right? That's a very, very narrow view. Reality is that there's a massive ecosystem of companies that trade, receive, sell, share data, but also the companies that physically have possession of the car are under the law essentially in the same position of holding a hard drive that is unencrypted contains of personal data. And many, many laws state that they have a fiduciary responsibility. Frankly, today, in many cases, it's not met. Many companies do have programs. Again, we try to make it visible on vehicle privacy reports. And so, for instance, some of your audience, when they go and try and enter, for instance, the name of their auto finance company, may be surprised to know that they have a program in place to protect the data whenever their car comes at the end of a lease or if the vehicle is repossessed or something else happens to the vehicle. So if they end up owning the car, they'll actually delete the data because they want to take good care of the data of their customers. But some don't. And the point of making it visible is because we think it's important that consumers know, because hopefully consumers will make financial choices based on that. I think that the more consumers are empowered with knowledge and the more they show to companies that they'll prefer companies that do better things for privacy, the more privacy will improve across the ecosystem.
So, to ask you about the permanent headache that all of us privacy professionals face, the state privacy law patchwork, very curious to know, are cars that are sold in certain states that have comprehensive privacy laws? So, for example, let's say a car being sold in California, does it come with more privacy protections or the same standards applied within the entire United States?
so, um,
The
so,
sigh
so,
is all of us hearing about the privacy of the patchwork.
well, so, um, look, first of all, there is clearly the your theoretical protection change depending on where you live. That's a very, very hard reality for not only Americans, but everywhere around the globe. Okay. So if you have laws that protect your privacy, you start from a theoretical starting point. So I live in Georgia, right? Georgia doesn't have a privacy policy. I can tell you that most manufacturers will say that you shouldn't have any control over your data. There's no meaningful way for you to assert your preferences over your data. There really isn't, because they're provided to you because they're not mandated by law. Okay. But there are some states that have great protections, but the practical application of those protections is fundamentally lacking. Right. And I'll give you two examples. Like just last week, the date in which we're recording this, um, and so probably it's a month by the time that people will listen to this. A auto manufacturer was fined in California because the California Privacy Protection Agency says they have not given a practical way for consumers to have meaningful privacy choices in the way that the law mandates this is supposed to happen. So even though those consumers in California have theoretically some of the best rights in the United States, in practice, this is not happening, or was not happening to the extent that the law actually is supposed to work.
Mhm.
I'll give you a second example. We have, again, through Vehicle Privacy Report, consumers can appoint us as an agent. We had hundreds of consumers from Oregon, and Oregon is a very interesting state for us because one of the rights that consumers have in Oregon is they can not only ask companies to tell them what are the generic categories of data and what are generic categories of companies you share with. No, no, no. In Oregon, you can say, what is the exact list of companies you shared my data with? And we filed hundreds of those. And people will be shocked to hear, but 0%, not a single one of them was answered within the 45 days stated by the law or ever. We're still waiting for responses. So even though consumers may have rights in certain places in the world, it doesn't mean that those protections are actually in place. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you have an audience in Europe, but I think that everybody looks at GDPR as possibly the best framework for privacy in the globe. I can tell you that I today feel that consumers in America, at least parts of America, get much better privacy protections than consumers in Europe.
It's interesting that you mentioned Europe. So I'm Lithuanian, and my husband and I go to Lithuania all the time to see my family. And my cousin purchased this really nice new car for his work. And every single time he started his car, the consent popped up saying, "Are you okay with us collecting, using, and sharing your data?" And the first couple times he turns on the car, he clicks yes. I'm like, no, you should click no. And starts clicking no. And then he, gets out of the car, gets back in. And then eventually he just ends up clicking anything to make that pop-up go away. Because he's so sick of it. So do you think that, that kind of decision fatigue is really the best way to approach consent when it comes to cars?
Well, I think that the law is pretty clear on that, right? So those kind of UXs, user interfaces, and user experiences, the FTC defines them as dark patterns, or
Mhm.
I think the dark pattern is the most commonly used term for it. And essentially, it should be unlawful to build an experience that essentially nudges continuously people into making choices that are bad for their privacy because of exactly the kind of things that you're describing, right? Because it's annoying, because you just want to go it away, because you just want to drive. I have a similar experience. My parents are in Italy. The car that my mom and dad have, same thing. You start it as a pop-up, but if you say no, after a while that you drive, it pops it up again. And so, you're driving, you're looking at navigation. Like, I'm not familiar, right, with many places. I have the navigation up, and the pop-up comes in, and now you have a distraction problem too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, these are some of the wonderful examples that we have in automotive, and unfortunately, they're extremely common.
Yeah, especially while you're driving. I mean, that's so dangerous because you could get into a car accident because you're reading that consent pop up, and then every time you start the car, I mean, anybody, even with the patience of a saint, will eventually start just clicking whatever.
Yeah, and if you think about it, this is really the equivalent of a cookie banner, right?
Hmm.
And with cookie banners, we eventually figured out that choices must be symmetrical. You cannot keep like, imagine if I go on a website and I get a cookie banner and I say, no, I don't want any cookies. But every link you click, you get another pop that says, hey, have you changed your mind? Hey, do you want to give me your data now? Hey, like, nobody would tolerate this.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the norm, right? And also the other thing is that fortunately with websites, we started to see the emergence of global opt-out mechanisms. And when it comes to IoTs, and cars are just the largest, most expensive IoT that there is, but it is an IoT, right? Um, those things have not been accepted by the industry, and there's a tremendous amount of pushback on using universal opt-out mechanisms to say no to IoTs.
Mm. Yeah, that'd be pretty cool if, for example, on your phone, you could say, I don't want any of my devices to track me, including my car. And it did that for everything that you own, from your smart alarm clock to your washing machine to your car.
Yes, and in fact, a couple of years ago, I started to think with the idea of how we create an opt-out, universal opt-out for cars, and I invented something, and then we started to test, and we realized it didn't work just for cars, but it worked for TVs and routers and smartphones, etc. And when Colorado last year had an open call, I think for universal opt-out mechanism, we submitted this idea, which is called opt-out code. I won't spend time telling you about it, but it's just literally as simple as renaming your device, and it works. Um, and if your audience is interested, just go to optoutcode.com and read about it. And I think it's such a cool idea. It's entirely nonprofit. Like, it was literally a free gift to humanity. This idea of let's create an opt-out for IoTs. I think we're going to do something with it later this year, but time will tell.
That's awesome. Yeah, the world needs gifts like that because we're all sick of just consenting to everything every other minute. Um, in the US, we've seen the Federal Trade Commission take some actions against automotive companies. Can you tell us just a little bit about those actions, like the actions against General Motors or dealer built?
Yes, and again, at the time of the recording, the two of the commissioners have just been fired, so who knows what's going to happen with the Federal Trade Commission. But I think the General Motors one is probably the most interesting one because um, General Motors settled with the Federal Trade Commission um, and essentially agreed that they would not sell the data of consumers until 2030. There were no fines, and when I talk to people, a lot of people say, "Oh my gosh, there were no fines. This is irrelevant." But actually, it's extremely meaningful because if you run the math on what General Motors was planning, what was the value of the data that they attached to it in what they told investors, that's a very, very large number. It's probably in the order of magnitude of $1 billion. So it is actually a very, very meaningful precedent. I guess we're all going to wait and see what's going to happen because that action is specific to General Motors only. It does not apply to other manufacturers, and it's very unclear at this time whether other manufacturer will take a cue and say, maybe we should have a more privacy respectful way of doing business, or whether they're going to keep going down their current path.
Hopefully, we see more companies doing that, voluntarily, and then also having this extended past 2030 as well.
I sure hope so. Look, what I do notice, what I think is very, very important, which is ultimately the thing that will reshape the industry in automotive, is that consumers start to care.
Mhm.
I've seen statistics done about third party that says that 6 out of 10 car buyers would buy a vehicle from a different brand over privacy. And
Wow.
1 in 10 buyers of cars claim that they already did. Now, I have no, those numbers are debatable. And, again, we have not done the analysis ourselves. But if it is true that consumers are increasingly curious about privacy, and it is increasingly easier for them to understand what are good privacy choices and bad privacy choices, and they're willing to spend money in a different way, that is what ultimately will change the industry. Because I often tell people that privacy today, where safety was with vehicles in the Pinto era, companies were building cars that were not very safe, and people got in accidents, and companies were running a spreadsheet with, well, should we change the design of the tank so that when I'm hit from behind at a certain speed, at a certain angle, the car goes boom and people die inside? Or should we just leave it design it is? Because if I run the math on how many people will die and how many lawsuits and how much it's going to cost me to settle it, then maybe we're better off not doing anything. Today, we live in that world when it comes to privacy. Companies are running spreadsheets on deciding what should we do. And the current business model is, we want to collect data from cars. We want to monetize it in a variety of ways through additional services or additional revenue that we get directly from consumers or because we sell it to other companies. And what is the risk that this is going to yield the negative results? And I think the more consumers show that they're willing to spend their money in a different way, and the more you will see that companies will have an incentive in doing things better. Ultimately, what I'm begging the industry to do is, will please somebody do for privacy what Volvo did for safety? While people were still debating, should we put seatbelts or not, they were putting airbags in cars. And still today, if you ask Americans what's the safest car out there, they will tell you it's a Volvo. By the way, it's not. But that built a brand that lasted 40 years. And my hope is somebody will understand that since so many consumers want it and nobody's giving it to them, the smart thing to do is to actually give better privacy to consumers.
I hope so too. I really hope so because I think we're all going to be better off with more privacy protections in these cars. So, your company, Privacy for Cars, can you tell us a bit more about the resources that you provide to businesses, like your documentation on how to wipe data from cars?
Yeah, so we are a B2B company. I think a lot of people think that we are a consumer company. We do a lot of free stuff for consumers. Again, we provide a lot of information. We provide a lot of free tools for consumers. And then we have the industrial strength version of what we do for consumers for businesses. And so essentially we help companies such as dealerships. When you bring in a trade-in, they have the tools to reliably and efficiently delete data from the cars and give you a certificate to show you that they are the good people you should be doing business with. They are the ones who put badges on their inventory. So when you are in the comfort of your homes, you start to think about, I want to buy a car. Well, some dealers will not say anything about privacy. Some of them will show you what does the vehicle privacy report for this car says. So at least you start to have information you can use in your purchasing decision. We also work with a lot of fleets. We work with auto finance companies and so on and so forth. So we have built an ecosystem of companies that want to do the right thing. And again, a part of building vehicle privacy reports was we wanted to show the consumer there's actually good folks out there that want to do the right thing, and shouldn't they get credit for it?
What I thought was really cool, I went on your website and I could search dealerships by my area that are privacy friendly. And I thought that was so cool. And I wish I would have found that before I bought my car. But how does your dealership partner program work?
Well, they subscribe to we offer a service which is a digital service, right? So they subscribe to a set of solutions, and there's different flavors. Um, but essentially, what most dealers do is that they buy the rights to use our tools to delete data from cars, to produce the certification both internally for compliance, but also again to tell consumers this is why you should trust us and not the dealership across the street or the one across town of the same brand. If you want to bring back your lease, do you want to do it at a dealership that promises they will protect your data or one that doesn't even know what that means? So, what we're really trying is again to make trust valuable, to make privacy a talking point, because frankly, it should. Because again, cars are no longer the mechanical things that I drove when I was young. um, they've become highly computerized systems, and I think people should know and should have tools and should have resources.
It's a cool way to use privacy as a competitive advantage, too.
Yes, and by the way, the dealers that use they love us because just like you started with, you have your own story about a rental car. I promise you, if you ask a person, everybody has a story.
Yeah.
Everybody has a story. And in fact, some dealers they go like, okay, I'll pilot it at one store. And invariably, we ask them, what is the story you heard from a consumer? And somebody's gonna say, I had this person that came to my dealership and they realized that sold the car, they traded in the car, and they were worried 2 weeks later that their data was still in the car. We told them, yeah, don't worry because we actually take care of it. Here's a copy of your certificate.
Hmm.
Like, what a difference, right?
Yeah.
Again, loyalty. This is a very very big purchase. A car today, the average new car costs nearly $50,000. Don't you want to do business with somebody that you trust? And by the way, also true for dealers. Is your only point of differentiation going to be, do I sell it for $50,000 or 49 and 900, right? And so it's just a pricing thing. Or do you want to tell people, bring the car here because you can trust me and I'll do the very best I can with the best tools that exist to protect your data?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely want to go to somebody who takes that seriously, and it's really cool that your tool shows that. So, last question for you: where can people learn about you and your company?
Well, they can go to privacy for cars, which is spelled privacy number four, cars with an s.com. And again, I think that please, my call to action to everybody is check your car. Go to vehicleprivacyreport.com, punch in the VIN. The VIN number is the identifier, is like the serial number of your laptop. You can see it through the windshield. There's a label typically when you open the door on the driver's side. Punch in the number and learn something about your car that I promise you didn't know before. And I think it's going to open your eyes to the fact that the car is much more than a mechanical thing, and I don't think you're going to look at your car the same way you did before if you go to vehicle privacy report.
That's awesome. That's a really cool tool. I'm excited to use it myself and see what they got about me. So thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today about cars and privacy. And for any of our listeners, please make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss our next episode.
Thank you, Donata.